Joining us on the line now is our legal analyst, Joe DiGenova. Joe, good day to have somebody with a good legal mind on hand. We got so many good questions to ask about this government shutdown. But here's mine. I'll start out. If there's a government shutdown, my gosh, I don't see any way that we're not going to have at least a short shutdown. The District of Columbia says that it will continue to operate with full staff because they have decided, in the mayor's infinite wisdom, that all employees of the District of Columbia are indeed essential employees. Is it legal for them to do that?
Well, that's a question that will be decided by a court. It probably isn't legal. But actually what they're doing is they're actually spending money that's already been appropriated. There is a slush fund that the city has that they're allowed to spend the money any way they want, and that money has already been appropriated. It's several $100 million. And so they can use that money to pay all city employees. When that money runs out, however, they cannot spend any money, and they cannot name everybody an essential employee. That, of course, is a contradiction in terms. But the most important thing is they have avoided a personal disaster, because if they were to spend unappropriated funds, the person who authorizes that, which would be the mayor and the chief financial officer for the city and the head of any agency, would be personally, civilly liable for all the money spent. Forget the criminal penalties.
Yeah, so you say that legal question has sort of been delayed because they're going to take money out of their rainy day fund. That's
exactly right. They're going to spend money that has already been. The key is the money has to have been appropriated, and they have that already, but that's only a limited amount of money. When they try to spend money that is unappropriated, then that's when they violate the Anti-Deficiency Act, and they become personally liable for the monies spent.
And it's a criminal act. I mean, we could see Mayor Gray and Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, in a perp walk, cuffed and walked out. Is that going to happen?
I think we've seen enough pictures of members of the city council in perp walks. I think the number's now 3 this year. No, I don't think anybody's going to be criminally prosecuted, but they will be sued by the Justice Department.
Joe, I know that you follow the politics of stories like this, and of course one of the great narratives coming out of the Democrats on this one is, listen, Obamacare is the law of the land, and how dare you try to fight against this law since it is the law of the land. Well, there's another law that's the law of the land. That would be the Voting Rights Act. Of course, the Supreme Court had some new revisions to the Voting Rights Act earlier this year, and that isn't stopping the Department of Justice of going after North Carolina for their voter ID law. How can they do this considering what the Supreme Court decided last year is now the law of the land with regard to the Voters' Rights Act?
Well, what the Supreme Court struck down were the provisions of that law which required pre-clearance in certain key states like North Carolina, Texas, and other southern states because of their history of discrimination. The Supreme Court ruled that discrimination is now historically gone and that pre-clearance process is no longer required. However, the court did not strike down the whole law, and in there are provisions that still allow the Justice Department to try to fight discriminatory provisions of law. And the department under Holder is claiming that these new voter ID laws and associated provisions are discriminatory, and therefore they require a judicially created pre-clearance process for these states.
Yeah.
I think they're going to lose. I think the department, is going to lose. But they are trying to do everything they can to screw up the election process for 2014.
Yeah, I understand that distinction. However, we know that states like Indiana and Pennsylvania, they have passed voter ID laws, and the Department of Justice, Eric Holder, did not go after them. Seems he's only going after these southern states. So can it be argued that he's trying to enforce the Voters' Rights Act, retroactively at this point?
Well, what he's trying to do is, by the way, it's very important to note that the United States Supreme Court in the 1980s, with John Paul Stevens writing for the majority, upheld voter ID laws that require a photo ID. The Supreme Court law on this is that a photo ID is constitutional.
It's the law of the land.
It is the law of the land. And what's really fascinating about this is that the department is using a new creative interpretation of the Voting Rights Act because it's all that they have left to do. The department is going to lose this fight, and it's what's going to do. They're going to spend a lot of time and money, and they're going to force North Carolina and other states to do it. This is all about. You'll recall that the argument has always been is that this is denying people the right to vote.
Right.
Some would say that's what the IRS scandal is about, denying people the right to vote and organize.
Well, let me see if I have this right, because I'm a little confused. Maybe you can help me out, Joe. You can clarify my thinking here. So on one hand, you have the Democrats who didn't like the verdict that came down from the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be the ultimate say on matters that are legal. They didn't like the immigration laws that were on the books, so they just decided that they wouldn't enforce some of them. The president, even though it was his legislation, he decided he's going to delay some parts of Obamacare, but not delay others. And so he did that even though it's not clear he had the authority to do that. And yet over here in the House of Representatives, we have a group of Republicans who are trying to change the law through the regular process, and somehow, they are doing something that will, is in defiance of the law. I see them following the procedure. It's the president who never follows the proper procedure when he disagrees with the law.
Well, what's happened here is, the Democrats say, how can you possibly want to change the law? It's the law of the land. Well, Prohibition was the law of the land. Slavery was the law of the land. Dred Scott was a Supreme Court decision. All of those decisions, legislatively and judicially, were reversed. Of course it's possible to change a law, for heaven's sake. The Democrats are reduced to making stupid arguments. But the truth is, the stupid arguments are working because the Republicans have a lousy messaging system. And, for example, they didn't do the things they should have done. I would have never gone for defunding. I would have gone for 1 year delay.
Amen.
And I would have gone for removing the subsidies for federal workers and congressional employees, which the public doesn't like. But the strategy here and the tactics are not what I would have done. But here we are, and it'll be very interesting because I like Larry's history of what happens after a shutdown, and that the so-called dire consequences have never been dire.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe, for that. Let's keep that. I like Larry. Just cut it off right there. I like Larry. Hey, Joe, real fast, did you watch? Are you a big Breaking Bad fan? Did you get into that?
What?
Breaking Bad, the TV show on AMC.
Never seen it.
Oh, because everyone went crazy for the season. Well, what was your, the series finales are huge, like the last episode of MASH, last episode of Cheers, Seinfeld. Did you, Sopranos, did you ever get into a show like that and get so caught up in the final episode?
No, actually not. I'm usually into wine and food late in the day.
Once again, you're so much classier than I am, Joe.
But let me just tell you something. The Washington football team, I don't call them the Redskins anymore because they have too many friends and Native Americans who think it's really a very bad term.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We do work. Our law firm does volunteer work for the Archery Museum, which is a Western museum out in California, and we work with a lot of tribes. And let me just tell you something. It's not just the Oneidas that have a hex on the Washington football team. It's a lot of American Indian tribes. So my view is I love the Washington football team. I root for them. I'm delighted they won their first game. But I'm not going to call them what they call themselves.
I never saw you as taking that position. I'm surprised.
You just made people at Media Matters' head explode, Joe DiGenova. You're so politically correct.
I have a lot of Native American friends who don't think very much of that name.
All right, Joe DiGenova, thanks for joining us as always on our Monday visit.
Bye.
Bye-bye.